Hi, my name is Liz Green, and I'm in the second year of the Business Analytics program. My project is about predicting grant approval using logistic regression, and this was a project that we worked on in our Introduction to Predictive Analytics course, where we started to learn using R for data analysis. A little bit about me. I have a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration with a concentration in finance. I worked for Dun & Bradstreet as a business analyst for a time before I decided it would be a good idea to go back and get my law degree. But basically, I took finance in undergrad. I took some statistics in undergrad, and I really liked it. I really enjoyed it, and if this type of program had been available, I think I would have jumped right into it. My experience basically falls into two camps: before I moved to Raleigh and after. Initially, I worked a lot in risk management, and I worked with insurance companies, and I worked as a consultant, analyzing risk exposures and also overseeing litigation management. And here in Raleigh, I've worked in the mortgage industry, and I'm looking to add to that and retool and enter into something in data analysis. And my expected graduation date is next May. The question that we were asking is, will a logistic regression model utilizing one or more grant application variables have greater predictive value than the null hypothesis, which is basically that none of the variables are going to have a statistically significant effect on predicting whether a grant will be approved or not? And I want to point out here that in logistic regression, it's a bit different than, well, it's very different from linear regression. In linear regression, the variables, once we run the model, will have a coefficient which will tell us how it impacts the answer, and it will increase it or decrease it. But with logistic regression, and here with binomial, we were looking at a two-category variable, approved or not approved. And what our coefficients are going to tell us is how they impact the odds ratio, the odds that the chances of a successful result will be affected by a unit increase in that variable. Okay, so as Elizabeth mentioned, the big challenge in this project was the data set. And the data was provided on Kaggle. It had 8,707 observations, 249 predictor variables, and it spanned a 3-year time period. And this is just a quick snippet, as much as I could fit, of what the data looked like when we first received it. So the first thing I did was reviewed the data codebook, and the codebook is basically the information that's provided to you with the data set. It tells you about the structure. It tells you hopefully what the data means, hopefully gives you a clue to decipher the abbreviations that they've thrown in there, and hopefully covers all of them so you can really figure out what you're looking at. And as I mentioned, our target variable was a grant status. 1 would be approved and 0 would be not approved. Just a quick listing of the predictor variables. We had sponsor codes, we had grant category codes, which could have been very useful, and in fact may have been useful if we split it into channels, because different grants grant providers could find different characteristics to be important. But unfortunately, in the code book, well, you could look up the category codes, but there were hundreds of them, and it was really a situation where you would need a subject matter expert to really help you there, and it would help the analysis a lot. Other variables were missing lots of data as well. We could have used research fields, but once again, it was just an overabundance of data and a lot of missing. So person ID, I felt, would be important. There were 15 people per project, and each person had 14 attributes. So you can see how it was just expanding out. And a lot of missing data after you got past the first or second person. So I decided to use the first person listed, and I decided to use it. He had a role, they would have a role associated with them, and I used the principal investigator role. I decided to take 6 predictors. The grant category code, just because I thought it could still have an effect, the number of faculty under this principal person, the number of successful prior grant applications they had had, as well as the number of unsuccessful applications, and the number of top-tier articles they had published, the 2 top tiers. This resulted in me reducing the data set from about 24%, but I ended up with no missing observations for the remaining data set, which is required for the logistic regression to run. I took this data, which I had analyzed in Excel, and I read it into R. Oops. And then I went ahead, I only selected the columns I was going to use, I renamed the data, and I labeled it. So then I explored it again in R, and I'm just going to go over one of the summary statistics that are available. And it gave me statistics like the mean, the median, the range, and then for the categorical variable of the grant category, it gave me a frequency table. And then some of the interesting things, some of the principal ID person on the project, they would have maybe 1 faculty under them, or they would have 187 faculty under them. Some had no successful grants, some had 13, others had up to 26 unsuccessful grants, which ended up being not a good thing at all for them. And then some had up to 123 top-tier journal articles, and some had none. So next I trained the model on the test data. I took the whole data set and I split it randomly into 85% used to build the model, 15% used to train it, which is a validation, or to test against it, which is a validation technique to make sure that the model's going to work on unseen data. I used the GLM function in R. Grant status was the dependent variable. I took my data set in. The argument that it took was the binomial, because it was a 2-category variable, and the logit function is what gives us our model results. And the output showed, and this is just a snippet of the output, that we had several significant variables, and when I say significant, the p-value was less than 0.05, which says it didn't show up just because of randomly. So these values being less than 0.05 negates the null hypothesis, and it tells us that these variables are statistically significant. And some of the variables were the grant category codes. Interestingly, the top tier journals, the number you had was not significant, but the second level was. So because it's logistic regression, we need the odds ratio. We can't just use the coefficients. There's a function in R where we take the exponent of the natural exponent of the coefficient. And what it told us for the number of successful grants is for each additional successful prior grant application, the odds of this grant application being approved increased by about 1.97%. It also showed us for each increase in the number of prior unsuccessful grants, the odds were going to decrease by about 0.68% because we're multiplying it by a number less than 1. And what I did, there's several evaluation metrics that you can use. I picked one to present to you, and this just shows how well the model is working on unseen data, which is what we want to see. Is it going to help us answer a question? So I used the predict function in R, and I used the data set, and what it is doing is assessing how well it was predicting the response variable, how well it was classifying it. And it went ahead and said the accuracy of the model is 0.75%. So, okay, I mean, if I was predicting whether stock was going to go up or down, I'd be pretty happy with that. So in summary, the data preprocessing is a really critical step. We had a lot, Elizabeth had mentioned this a bit. It really was challenging, and a lot of students were having a lot of trouble because the model wasn't running, and it wasn't running, and it was because of the way you really had to sift through the data and say, what is it telling me and how can it help in the model? And then that's because We want the data and the results to be in a usable form, because the reason we're doing it is we want something that we can take an actionable result on or decide, we don't want to do this. And lastly, if you're in your first class in the program, you're going to learn so much this year. But hopefully you really enjoy it. I really enjoy it. And you've probably found your tribe here too, if it's something that you enjoy. Thank you.